Hello, and welcome to a live show. If you are in here, if you're in the comments, if someone could confirm to me that the mic is coming through okay, that the camera is coming through okay, and that everything, looks hunky dory, that would be amazing. Um, yeah, so I thought that it would be a good day today to yap about how to adapt history to plots to world building and so on, and also the difference between world building for, say, a game versus world building for, say, a story that you're writing. Like, what are the different elements that you need to look at when you're world building for a story, like a plot, versus um, a game that you're running for people versus even a video game. Like, what are your different techniques, and how can you use history as a means of adapting any of these things to your world, to your story, to your campaign, to whatever it is that you are creating. So that was my thought for what we're doing today. I'm just um, hey Gary, how you doing? Good to see you again. Can you hear me okay? Um, can you see me okay? Okay. So that is the essence of today's conversation: is how do you adapt things to world building in its various formats? Okay. Um, so let's start with what led me to this point. There is a creator I really like following. His name is Pat Mandziwai. I will put that in here. Pat Mandziwai. He makes shorts, right, that are predominantly focused on history, a lot of medieval history, but also some extras around Chinese history and so on. Mostly sort of European and China focused during the medieval period. And they're really fun shorts. He did a great series of shorts on William Marshall and so on. And I was watching his shorts about Isabella and Mortimer in the Middle Ages. So I'm going to give you a recap of who Isabella and Mortimer was, and how they, and what their story was. So Edward II was an English king of not the best reputation of the of the Edwards. He was not, shall we say, a supreme example of Edwardness, and he was also, in all likelihood, 90% chance, he was as gay as the day was long, right? He had this male favorite called Piers Gaveston that he was so attached to. His father exiled Piers, and then when Edward II ascended to the throne, he of course called Gaveston back immediately, and it was pretty much an open secret that they were boinking like bunny rabbits, right? And the thing is, obviously, Edward II was a king. He was a monarch. He had to have children, right? The primary thing that a monarch has to do is produce the next heir. Like, you know. And so, of course, a royal marriage was arranged with Isabella of France. Okay. Now, she was very young when they got married, and apparently she actually quite liked Piers Gaveston. There was no particular distress between her and Piers Gaveston, and there was no distress between her and Edward either. That might have been because she was young. It might have been because Piers was, a great knight and a fairly nice guy. For whatever reason, their relationship worked. Bearing in mind that all of these marriages, these are not love matches, right? These are like affairs of state. They're the relationship arranged in order to create heirs and so on. And But then there was a whole bunch of nobles who got real jealous of Piers Gaveston. And he had an unfortunate incident with a window, and, got yeeted out the window, and died. And that after Edward had done grieving for Piers, he got involved with another man called Hugh Despenser the Younger. Now, Hugh Despenser was he was a piece of work. So he basically like took over running England through his relationship with Edward. He manipulated and gaslit Edward into giving him like authority. And this led to a man called Mortimer, Roger Mortimer, rebelling against the crown. He lost the rebellion and he fled to the French court. Okay, all good. Then Isabella had a massive falling out. She did not like Hugh Despenser. She'd been fine with Gaveston. She did not like Despenser. And she eventually basically had to flee to went to France as well, but she had to leave her children behind. And then at the French court, she met Roger Mortimer. And it was a combination of love at first sight and mutual hatred for Hugh Despenser and by then Isabella's husband, Edward. And the two of them started bonking like bunny rabbits, which was a huge scandal. It's one thing for a man at that time, it was one thing for a man to be cheating on his wife, right? It was completely different for a queen to be sleeping with anybody other than her king. This was huge deal, scandal everywhere. And Roger Mortimer and Isabella were not exactly, they were not like subtle about this. But they were unified in their hatred for Edward, and they pulled this shenanigan scheme to get Isabella's child out of England. And once they had her child, off they went back to England, and they led a rebellion from France. And their rebellion was successful. They killed Hugh Despenser, and well, Edward must have eaten something that really didn't agree with him, because he just went into a car, went out. No one knows exactly what happened. You know. And then Roger Mortimer and Isabella basically ruled England, right, on behalf of Isabella's young son, Edward the Third. I think it was Edward the Third. Anyway, so and they were very much like the rulers of England at that point. So you can make a whole fantasy story out of what I've just said, right? You have the queen who's just been robbed of her happy marriage by the entrance of the snake Hugh Despenser, and she flees to France. And then you have a conjunct storyline of Roger Mortimer who flees after his failed rebellion. And then you have the two of them hooking up and the two of them coming back to England. And this is a triumphal moment. But you don't have to tell that story, because there's another story here as well, which happens afterwards, which is where eventually Isabella's son gets really unhappy and looks at Roger and Mortimer and is like, "You're not my real dad." And basically, he eventually not only takes control of England, and I think there was another like mini rebellion or fight or whatever involved there, and he executes Roger Mortimer. He does not execute Isabella, but he does strip her of her power of Queen Dowager and, and take control of the kingdom by himself. And that story is equally interesting, right? So there's a whole bunch of really great historical stories if you kind of dig into that, into the period of medieval history. And it's stories that we have a great deal of documentation for, which is what makes them very accessible, right? You're not working with fragmented documentary sources the way you are with like the Bronze Age, or even worse, the Stone Age, where we're guessing at a lot of information. The Middle Ages, we have heaps of information, which makes it very accessible. Um, so that's just taking history. And I mean, I've spoken before about the Merovingians and how study the Merovingians and their insane history, and how, how much story potential there is in it. Here's the thing. If you are adapting your world building to, let's say you want to run this as a campaign or even as a video game. So let's start with like TTP RPG, which is actually one of the more complicated world building elements, because you're building the world, but your players are going to be interacting with it, right? So your players, you need to give them sufficient information. Their characters can be main characters in this world. Okay. But at the same time, like while you want them to drive the plot and to investigate and all the rest of it, they cannot be the plot makers because you can't stay far enough ahead of them. So you still have to kind of make the plot, but they need to drive the events, which is actually quite complex to world build for. People don't give game masters who build their own worlds enough credits. It is really complex to build a campaign that works for players. It is not an easy feat. But there is one key. So this is like, if we take that story of Isabella and Mortimer, right? If I were running that as a campaign, I wouldn't necessarily make of the players Isabella or Mortimer, right? I would make them knights attached to either the French court or the English court, or I would make them sort of adventurers in the English court, or I would make them, guards of Isabella, or a maid in waiting of Isabella, or a spy of Roger Mortimer's, or something like that, right? That they are attached to the principal story drivers, but they will be critical to the principal story drivers either achieving a happy ending or failing. But I am always hesitant to put players in the position where they are playing like Isabella or Mortimer himself, right? And if you look at game developers, you see that the same thing applies to video games. So my current favorite video game, absolutely hands down, is Ghosts of Tsushima. Came out 2 years ago. It was the last game that came out for PlayStation 4. I still don't have a PlayStation 5. Don't judge me. They're expensive and I don't have a lot of time to game. But anyway, so I enjoy Ghost of Tsushima. I still enjoy Ghost of Tsushima. And Ghost of Tsushima, you don't play the uncle who's in charge of the defense of the island. Nor do you play like, a direct commander or anything like that. Okay? You play the the uncle's your uncle is in charge of the command of the island, and you get separated from your uncle and you have to try and like deal with the invaders yourself, and it's a whole like thing, and you're trying to rescue your uncle and so on. So it you still get the main character energy, but you're not the main driver of the central plot line. But because it is a game where the focus is on you, you are still the main character of your story. Your story is just attached to the central plot line. And that, I think, is one of to design your campaign for D&D. If you're adapting to a fantasy book, or if you're adapting to a or if you're adapting real world history as your plot or whatever you're doing, is um, have your NPCs that are driving your main kind of plot line story, sure, but they use the players to or put the NPCs into a position where the players have to rescue them, or the NPCs request that the players act in certain ways, or whatever the case is, right? So you kind of like they are driving the story because you can control the NPC's motivation. So they have a motivation that drives the plot. And the player characters weave in and out because they are attached to the NPC. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Are you following what I'm saying? Gary, you make a great point. In a tabletop game that is about 4 to 7 hours to get 30 minutes of time to play. Yeah, it can take a while to prep for your tabletop gaming. What I generally like to do for my preparation for when I'm running games is I construct my NPCs who are driving whatever my current plot line is. So, for example, I'm currently running very short little campaigns, like three sessions at a time for my long-standing group because one of my players is in the last stages of pregnancy. So once she, has her baby, that'll be her and her husband for like 2 years. um, so at that point, we'll construct a new group and play separately. But we so I'm running these short games because I don't know when it's going to come to an end. So what I'm doing there, we're running in cyber. So the little 3 thing campaign that I just ran now is players have got a contact in the city council of Night City, and that council member had somebody who is defecting from Militech and coming to Night City, right? But they needed that person extracted from Washington, from like the military, from the NUSA headquarters. So that's the main story driver. The player characters are incentivized through their relationship, right? And the other side, I have the NPC who's defecting, who's got his motivations, and he is the main story driver. So the story is about, the guy defecting and the person receiving him. And then the player characters need to figure out how to do the extraction, right? So Um, and so once I have my main story characters, I then figure out who my villain is, which in this case was very easy. It was Nusa, and Nusa has to try and kind of prevent the extraction of this dude. So there's, some military shenanigans and that kind of thing. And the players have to, figure out a plan and so on. So, and it was a very short campaign, but it was successfully done by them. And, then I'll figure out another job like that, which will have a driving NPC, a villainous NPC, and probably some other NPC involvement somewhere. And then the players, and then I have the world at my disposal. So I play in the cyberpunk world. So obviously I've got a setting that's already built. And I just let the use the setting to kind of make the obstacles and the monsters and whatever the case is. So that is how I prepare for game sessions. Is I do this kind of like higher level story preparation, and then kind of cope with the players. If you run in your own world, that takes more preparation because obviously you also have to then communicate that world to the players, right? So you need to give the players like handouts, and you can't depend on kind of shared knowledge and that kind of thing. So yeah. Um, yeah. Okay. So, um, let's do some Q and A. Um, what do you have any questions about this? Do you have questions about adapting from history to story? adapting from history to game, adapting story to game. Do that. You can take a story that a fantasy story or whatever, and adapt that to the players by the same technique. So you have uh, your your driving NPCs, your villainous NPCs, and the players are attached to them and weaving kind of in and out of the storyline. In and out of the storyline, achieving kind of ancillary objectives that move the storyline forward or take it back or whatever the case may be. Um, so yeah, um, chuck any questions in the comments. Other than that, I am busy working on a new series about aristocrats, well, nobles, aristocracies, and how to construct a aristocratic court, why aristocrats would work together, how they would work together, how they would kind of keep each other in line, what the relationships was between them, and how you kind of use that politics both as like a if you have commoners who are telling your story, what the court means to commoners, and also like what court politics would play out like, and all of that kind of detail. Goodness, I have so much cat hair on my microphone. My freaking my girl cat Asura, the one who meows every time I'm recording a video, loves the microphone. Like she will come and rub her little face all over the mic. I'm amazed I still have like a muffler on top of it. Um, yeah, so um, chat is very quiet. I hope that you guys found value in this stream. It's a short stream if we don't have questions, because that was primarily what I wanted to talk about was the adaptation process between history and sort of that's a great point, Gary. Movies is a very, very good inspiration for plots. Um, you know, especially because you can adapt. You can adapt them so well to various situations. Like you can take a modern day storyline, like a James Bond kind of story, and adapt it to a medieval story, and so on and so forth. That's something that I've also like really enjoyed doing. I do want to mention, speaking of adapting storylines and doing all kinds of things, I have a story that is currently in Kickstarter pre-launch phase. I'm going to put the label in the, um, I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. So that is Blood and Bloom in Las Vegas, and it is a noir-inspired urban fantasy with like so the voice is noir-inspired, and my aim was to write a kind of modern day noirish story um, with with fairies and so on, but like with real meat to the story. So these are not like fairies, Peter Pan fairies, or even like Loverly fairies or whatever. These guys are serious business, and they will quite happily kind of enslave humanity and stomp on the necks of people and so on. And they're held at bay with this thing called the Pact. And our main character, Lily, is a sentinel, which is kind of like a magical cop who keeps the pact. She's part of like the people who try and preserve this pact between fairies um, and the magical world of humans, or the people who have magic in the world of humans, our world. And that is threatened when artifact sword is stolen, and the sword was last seen in Las Vegas, and she's the sentinel of Las Vegas. So now she has to like run around and try and figure out what's going on. And there's shenanigans and fairies and threats and sorcerers and fallen gods and all kinds of fun and games. And in between all this, she's also trying to figure out what she wants from her relationship with Emiko, who is also a magical person, who uses sumi art, which is that Japanese ink painting art. So she uses that to manipulate magic, and Lily uses druidic sigils, the Ogham Fedas of the druidic script, to manipulate magic. So I designed the whole magic system to be like there's a source of magic that people manipulate in different ways, not directly through their bodies. They have to prepare spells. So like the Sumi discipline paints their spells with the ink, and the um, Lily's discipline, the druidic guys, they write their spells on Ogham staves, which are fallen sticks, and they write their spells on them. And so each discipline across the world has got these different ways of painting or writing or drawing or otherwise creating spells in different ways, and then channeling magic into those spells through fairy dust, fairy dust is generated when Bloom Fae, which are the smallest Fae, when they do the Devil's Tango, they generate fairy dust, and fairy dust then powers magic spells. So the little Bloom Fae fairies are like critically important to magic, and you need to attract them to live in your garden and all of that kind of thing, and make it an attractive place for them to generate dust for you. Um, The Papal States is such an interesting time period. I'm to my to the follow up, my new Sangwheel, my new epic fantasy series that I'm working on now, which book one is still miles away from done. They're still like at least 6, 7, 8 months in the future, but I am working there on adapting the investiture controversy, when you had like the bishop, the pope and the kings feuding over who would appoint bishops to the church. So I'm adapting that as a storyline, to use in one part of my world, and it's been a fascinating exercise. I've never dived really deeply into the investiture controversy until now, but it was a crazy time. Like, it was bananas. Like John Lackland be like, "I'm gonna appoint the bishop," and the king's like, "No, you're not." And the Pope put England under interdict, and I think there was and other countries as well. He's completely interdicted them, which meant that people couldn't be baptized, they couldn't be buried on holy ground, like there couldn't be church services. It was bananas, right? And of course, like for the common people, this was devastating because they believed that this would essentially damn them to hell, right? And that their king was leading them in the wrong direction. It was chaos, like chaos. um, and so yeah, it's a fascinating read because of the king technically has military power, but a feudal king's military power is so dependent on the alliance they construct. I think this remains one of the biggest mistakes people make when they construct feudal kingdoms, is they construct them like a strong centralized state, the way we have much, much later, during the kind of the time when we're going late Middle Ages into Renaissance period, where you have this concept of a strong central state developing, right? Which of course culminated in the Treaty of end of the 30 Years' War, Westphalia, when the nation state concept was established. But the feudal kingdoms did not have strong centralized states. A king was like the mediator between his various nobles. He had to keep his nobles on his side. And if you lost the support of the Pope, despite the fact that the Pope had no military power, the Pope has only the soft power of the religion, right? But because the Pope could declare you anathema, could interdict you, could excommunicate you, could do all of these things to you, it weakened your ability to negotiate with your nobles and keep them on your side. And that is what makes feudal politics interesting. That lack of a strong state. The feudal politics are fascinating when the king is this like negotiator between his nobles, and he needs to strike deals, and he needs to bring the right nobles in, and all of that kind of activity. Like, that is what makes feudal politics fascinating. Without that element, it looks like a Renaissance kingdom, a strong central state, and one without all the complexities that you get with Renaissance politics, because Renaissance politics was a different kettle of fish entirely, right? That was where you started having nation states going to war, as opposed to people constructing various odd alliances to go to war with, and so on. It becomes a very, very different kettle of fish. So you can't really play feudal politics and have a strong central state. If you want to play feudal politics, you need feudalism. And if you want to have Renaissance politics, then you should construct not a feudal court. You should construct a Renaissance court, and that later kind of time period is what you're looking for. Yeah. Sorry, I know that's a hobby horse of mine, but it is so common to see these like strong centralized states, and you're like, "Eh, it's not it's not how feudalism worked." That's not the strength of feudalism. Let's put it like that. The strength of feudalism lies in its disconnected nature, in its lack of a strong central government, and in its ability for governance close to the site. So your local knight could make most of the decisions, and there was only the occasional like appeal to a centralized state. It does make it, as I have often said, the Ponzi scheme or the pyramid scheme of governance structures, but it did work for its purpose. Right? So, and I mean, like, that is important. Like, for all that I throw stones at it every now and again, it had a reason for developing. It did work for its purpose, and it only stopped working after like states just grew too big and centralized, and technology allowed for like centralization of state functions and communication and all the rest of that jazz. So, yeah. Um, all right, guys. It has been fun talking to you. I look forward to another live stream. Next week, Saturday, I will be releasing a compilation. Let me run a quick, see if there's a poll. Okay. Do you want an eras? What compilation do you want? Politics. Yeah. So hopefully you see that poll there. I don't know how polls work exactly on live stream. I don't actually watch a lot of live streams. I consume a lot of YouTube, but I don't watch live streams live much. Mostly because, they're almost always at the wrong time for me. Downside of being European. Um, But, so those compilations I've been putting out, I've been taking my, various, playlists and so on, and constructing out of them a semi-coherent compilation. So, uh, yeah, they've been doing quite well, reasonably well anyway, and, I guess, like, people like getting the, like, 4 or 5 hours. Oh, absolutely. This Elizabeth, this is not a case of like you will never get the eras. This is a case of like when do you get eras versus when you get politics? Because I am working my way through, taking all of these old videos into compilations. Um, and into like these 4-hour compilations and whatever, 5 hours, 7 hours in the case of magic systems. um, so those compilations will come in due course, as I work my way through them, one at a month kind of thing. One of the things that I found, having switched to Linux, welcome to the penguin for me, is Linux has a great YouTube downloader on the terminal side. So now I no longer have to laboriously download each of my videos from YouTube. I can just say, get this whole playlist, and it does that, which is great. So, yay, Linux. um, Yeah, the compilations have been, interesting. I did not realize how many people like having sort of the big kinda 7-hour video or 4-hour video or whatever of, like, everything gathered into one. Um, so, yeah, I'm very happy to construct them. They don't take very long or anything because it's just a case of, like, attaching, the videos one to the other and maybe recording a couple of bridging, uh, short bridging videos. So that's great. Um, yeah, and then other than that, guys, it looks like politics is the winner, by by 100%. Um, and alright. So, I will see you next not next weekend, the weekend afterwards. I will put up a poll on the website, so on YouTube, so keep an eye out for that, about what we'll live stream in 2 weeks' time. Probably I'll put it up next week sometime. And then we will oh, hello. My cat's come to say hi. Hello, my baby. Um This is Asura. If you hear a cat meow when I'm recording, it's her. She is the guilty one. Um, so I will put up that poll, and then we can talk about whatever topic you guys are interested in discussing. That is my Microsoft lover. She is my Microsoft lover. She sleeps with me. She's exceptionally attached to me. And she'll ride on my shoulders and kind of rub against my ears and so on. So thanks, guys. It has been an absolute pleasure, as it always is, and I will chat to you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.